So in my last video, I talked a bit about this petition that fans of the Acolyte had signed and how just the number of signatures is relatively small. There's 72,000 signatures on this petition. There's another show called My Lady Jane with much smaller fan base, with a relatively unknown first season of a brand new IP with 66,000 signatures in about the same time frame, and how this just shows that actually support for the Acolyte among Star Wars fans, which number in the millions, of course, is not that high. It's just not anywhere near what fans of the show think it is. I think when I go, on the subreddit, when I see fans talking about the show, they just remain mystified, and they remain convinced that the only people who dislike the Acolyte are haters or toxic dude bros, bigots, yada, yada, yada. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people did not like the Acolyte for reasons that had nothing to do with the characters being multiracial or anything like that. It was much more about the production values, the writing, the story, which was just very subpar on all counts. And even the acting from some of the characters some of the actors was just very subpar. So I talked about then a little bit about how, Star Wars, Marvel, a lot of these properties are actually geared towards men and boys primarily. And just like video games are generally, a boy hobby, tabletop games a boy hobby. There are obviously girls, women who play games and all that. But if you look at actual statistics, if you look at surveys, if you look at all that stuff, it is still the vast majority of people who play video games or watch Star Wars are men and boys. Now, there's two theories here. One is that it's because society has shaped us this way, and with enough tinkering from the top, with enough, you could call it social engineering, or just like changing who the target audience is, right? You can make Star Wars appeal to girls just as much as boys. You can make video games appeal to girls just as much as boys. But I don't think that's true. I come from the other school of thought, which is that there are just innate differences between, and again, with many exceptions, and we'll get to that in a second, but there are just innate differences between what boys and girls like. And people I've seen in response to this, to my videos, have said, this is just like saying that boys like G.I. Joes and girls like dolls. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I don't want to be super reductive here and just say like all boys are going to like one thing and all girls are going to like the other. But again, statistically speaking, yeah, boys like G.I. Joes and girls like dolls. That's just the way it is. Like you can't change that. Whether you believe it's because society causes that, and that it's all just construct, gender is a construct and all these things, or whether you believe that there is a biological, psychological, difference between the sexes, which is where I come from. I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit of both. But this brings me to another point. A commenter made a really great comment about how it's not, there's another element to this. Okay. And he wrote, I'm just going to read some of his comment. But there are already girls who love these franchises. I'm going to back up a little bit. So yes, in a broad sense, things like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars are for boys. So there's a disconnect there that in order to bring in more women, they have to make a Star Wars that is for girls. But there are already girls who love these franchises. Society just puts them in a box where they are viewed as anomalies because they are girls with boy tastes. Certain aspects of society hate that. They have to find a reason for them having boy tastes, such as them being lesbian, non-binary, or trans, or fakers, pick-me's. But they just like stuff that boys do for the reasons boys like them, because taste isn't actually determined by sex. The same when it goes the other way in guys like girl genres like romance and musicals, etc. There's a push to explain it by saying they must be gay, non-binary, or trans, when they are just boys with girl tastes. And sometimes people like both things. I think most people do. They just like them in different proportions. I think that's a really good point. Like and I think this also goes back to what I've talked about in the past, how and it's not just, I've mentioned this theory of the half-interested girlfriend, but I think that beyond the half-interested girlfriend, there are a whole lot of girls who have enjoyed Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, D&D, and all these things for decades. And now as they're being as these companies are trying to make them more for girls, the girls with boys' tastes are also not enjoying these as much, right? Because there is, and that's the thing, like, I don't want... No, I like Broadway musicals because I just went and saw my first Broadway musicals actually this last weekend, but I've always liked musicals. I wouldn't want Broadway to change to appeal to a different audience than what it appeals to right now. Like, even if I'm not like the core demographic for Broadway shows, I don't want them to change Broadway to fit my tastes, right? Because then I might not like it as much. It's kind of like in a relationship when someone tries to change the other person and they change them and they change them and they change them and they fix them. And then at the end of the day, they're like, you're not the same as you used to be. I don't love you anymore. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Girls who like Star Wars don't necessarily have Leia as the character whose lens they view it through. They might identify with Luke or Han just as much, or even Chewbacca. Chewbacca is so cool, and he has hair to die for. The first step in making a Star Wars for girls isn't girl power with the franchise completely retooled. It's Xena, Jedi Master, to use an analogy. Ahsoka was sort of that when she showed up on The Mandalorian. It's giving the women who love Star Wars more of the boys' adventure stuff that they love about Star Wars, but with women characters. Characters who, like them, are girls with boy tastes. Making the Acolyte as if you're doing a bad Lifetime movie with Star Wars props is not what anyone who wanted more Star Wars wanted. I would argue that aside from the bad writing and everything else, the supposed female perspective that they claim to want to give to Star Wars to include female viewers was one that excluded the existing female viewership of Star Wars, because they failed to properly recognize the diversity of that female audience. I think that's a really great point, and this comment is actually super long, but I'll skip ahead a little bit. The nerdy genre subcultures have long been welcoming of diversity to a far greater extent than the mainstream, simply because being a genre fan was always so very difficult. Finding the stuff, supporting the stuff, even when it wasn't the best, getting together in fan groups, pushing to get things better, telling people about the good stuff so more people would buy it, watch it, read it. And when they all when they turned pro, all these guys leaned into the whole being marginalized thing in their work. You didn't care if action heroes, sci-fi heroes, fantasy heroes were Asian, white, black, or whatever, because you took what they gave you. So when you made your own stuff, that is what you put in there. So, and he just talks a bit more about how, like, you know, when the mainstream then tries to take over this fandom. So I'm just read this. People outside of fandom have this bizarre reductive idea of what fandom is. I sometimes think it's because they want to be applauded for passing out watered down versions of what we have had full on in genre fandom since the 1940s. And when they don't get the applause, they think it's because we hate diversity. So I think these are all really great points. And I just wanted to make a short video about that because I do think that it's so important to remember. I think there is so much gaslighting going on, right? For years and years and years now, members of the press, especially in like video game journalism, but entertainment media as well, people on social media, all these people, we've seen this huge rise in like genre fandom, right? I wrote years and years and years ago about the fantasy bubble in the Atlantic and how like all these things were becoming popular and how a part of me really liked that, but another part of me was worried because when things become popular and you start to have this surge in popularity for fantasy and all this other stuff, you're going to welcome in a lot of people who used to not like this stuff. The same people who often maybe bullied nerds in school are now it's cool to like the stuff that they liked. So we see a lot of this, a lot of people coming in and gaslighting nerds and nerd culture and fans who've been here for decades, saying, "Oh, these people are all just racist, sexist," you know, like the whole during Gamergate, the whole like they don't want girls in video games, and there was all this stuff that is just simply not true of my experience anyways, at all. With the fact of the matter is, and I've said this many times before, a lot of us, when we were young, you know, adolescents, teenagers, playing D&D, playing video games, into comic books, and whatever else, painting miniatures, we would have loved it if more girls did that stuff too. But the fact is, this stuff was not cool. You were not considered like your hobbies were not considered cool. They were not mainstream. The fact that this has all gone mainstream now is a double-edged sword for a lot of us. People call it gatekeeping, but trust me, we were not gatekeeping D&D and Spider-Man and Lord of the Rings in high school. We were trying to get other people into that. People didn't want to be. In fact, we were gate-kept out. Or some of us were. I guess I never really had a problem moving between circles. But I know a lot of like nerdy kids who, you know, they weren't welcomed into the popular kids circle. They weren't invited to parties. If there was any gatekeeping going on, it was the other way around. And now you have all these people. I swear to God, a lot of these people, a lot of these journalists, a lot of these video game journalists, media journalists, or entertainment journalists, writing all these op-eds about toxic nerds and toxic dude bros in game. They are the people who, when they were younger, didn't have any desire to be part of nerd culture and were absolutely the bullies and the gatekeepers of cool, right? Not all of them, obviously. I'm painting with broad strokes here. So, which reminds me, I want to read this little bit. All right. So the Mary Sue is a constant source of material for me, because their takes are almost always so terrible and badly written. And so here's Rachel Leishman. There are like 2 Rachels at this website that are just genuinely awful. The Rings of Power hate is as boring as it is predictable. And this is the reason I bring this up in this video, even though this video is kind of more about not the Rings of Power, but it all kind of connects together. Because again, I think that the Rings of Power, I think that it's totally fine and understandable to want to make new Lord of the Rings content that has more female characters, because there are virtually none in Lord of the Rings. And there are these characters, there's this whole world that you could bring in characters. I would have really loved it if they had brought in a female elven character who wasn't Galadriel, for instance. That would have been good, because they could have created a new character and not ruined an old one. So Rachel writes, "We're back with another installment of Let People Enjoy the Thing." Now, ironically here, you could start an article saying, "We're back with another installment of Let People Not Enjoy the Thing." And it basically would do the same thing that this article does. Because it's okay if you like something, it's okay if you don't like something. What's weird is when you write a whole entire really, really stupid piece just bitching about people who don't like it, and then claiming that because they don't like Rings of Power, they must not be real fans. It's just this no true Scotsman argument, straight from top to bottom. This time we're talking about The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. It is yet again another series that people online want to just hate on, because I guess? I don't get it. The show is fun to watch. Is this fucking written by a 4th grader? Like, okay. The thesis here in the opening paragraph, the thesis is people online want to hate on it just because, I guess. I don't get it. The show is fun to watch. Now, if this banger of a paragraph doesn't get you interested in what comes next, I don't know what will. The Rings of Power, okay, there's some summary. This has, for reasons that should be obvious at this point, brought out the worst of the internet. From the first season on, fans of this is what she does throughout the start. Fans of Lord of the Rings have complained about the show for one reason or another, most all of them about the inclusion in the series. That has certainly been a complaint, but does Rachel ever try to understand what most people are complaining about? And I don't mean the clearly, racist comments at the bottom of the barrel, but people who talk about having some cohesive racial component in this medieval society. For instance, like I talked about in my recent Rings of Power video, having the desert hobbits, the Stoors, be darker skinned, and having the forest hobbits, the Harfoots, be lighter skinned. That way you can have diversity, but also have it make sense and feel plausible and real, rather than just this weird tokenistic colorblind bullshit. It doesn't make sense in a medieval society with insulated communities who don't really mix with other communities, right? Because that's what happens in an insular community. If you have an island nation, all the people on that nation will have, if they're not traveling the world, if they just live on this island, they're all going to have the same skin color. It's not racist to say so. It's just the way that genetics works. Now, fast forward into a time period when there's trade and travel between the islands and the mainland and all that, you might start to see a more diverse group of people with different colors of skin. Anyways. Centering the series around Galadriel instantly put the angry men on alert. Then we have women of color in prominent roles, as well as men of color playing elves, dwarves, and other characters they didn't in Jackson's films. Again, I really don't think that the primary reason that people are upset by this is because they are racist, but rather because it has to make sense in a realistic, feudal, medieval society like The Lord of the Rings. There are ways to go about this that would make it a lot less of an issue. And of course, some people would still be upset. But anyways, These fans have said that they don't like the liberties the show is taking with J.R.R. Tolkien's work, but that argument isn't actually founded in what Tolkien and his family want. Tolkien and his family... Do you know how I know that? Because the Tolkien estate is heavily involved in the show. You know what the Tolkien family didn't love? Mainly Christopher Tolkien? The Peter Jackson movies. Now, yes, the Tolkien estate gave its blessing to this show for the small price of $250 million. And was it Simon Tolkien is the reason? Christopher Tolkien didn't like the Peter Jackson movies because, if I recall correctly, and it's been a while, they took liberties with The Lord of the Rings that he didn't really approve of. Now, The Rings of Power takes far more liberties than the Jackson movies did. And believe me, when the Jackson movies came out, I was not a huge fan either. Like, I liked some things about them, but I really didn't like some of the changes. I've softened to these over the years because I've realized in the grander scheme of things, they were very, 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 very faithful, and they tried to be faithful as best they could, at least. Whereas stuff like The Rings of Power doesn't even try. Now, Rachel's little theory here that Tolkien and his family would be okay with this is crazy, for one thing, because J.R.R. Tolkien has been dead for like 50 years. There is no way that Tolkien would be okay with this show. If you knew the first thing about Tolkien, you would know that he would absolutely be rolling in his grave right now. Christopher Tolkien, too. Whether, now the estate is a different beast. Totally different beast. And that certainly... It has nothing to do with what Tolkien would have wanted at this point. We've seen the estates of various authors make changes or approve of changes, including like the Roald Dahl books being censored. That was something approved by the estate. And these things happen with time. This is just how it goes. I get it. But that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. You can't say, well, the estate said that it's okay, so that means that the author would think it was okay. No, I don't buy it for a second. Yeah, Simon Tolkien, the grandson of Tolkien, is a consultant on the Prime Video series. Yeah. Well, Simon Tolkien can go suck a fuck. All right. Rings of Power is fascinating. I'm sorry. Semicolon. It just is. The first season of the show had a lot of mystery to it. Mystery boxes. Was Halbrand really Sauron tricking Galadriel? Who was the stranger? Is he Gandalf or another wizard? When will all the different tribes of halflings come together to be the hobbits, as we know them in the Shire? It excited me to see all of these aspects of the story being explored at the same time. Oh dear. If this shit excites you, I don't know what to say, man. Oh, in Season 2, we're seeing Sauron turn his gaze to Celebrimbor, and I think it is fascinating how the show explores Sauron's use of the elves. That, to me, makes the storyline with the elves from Lord of the Rings even more interesting. You could just... you think this is more compelling than the way that it's written in the books? In the show, Halbrand shows up, helps Celebrimbor make the 3 elven rings, and then leaves because he's been caught, then comes back as Anatar. Celebrimbor just is like, cool, alright, I'll let you in, and then they start making more rings. How is that better than in the books, where Anatar shows up from the beginning deceiving the elves? He doesn't get caught and then come back and then change his form. He just comes in that form. And then they make a lot of other rings before they get to the 3, which Celebrimbor makes in secret, having finally figured out that Anatar is actually not to be trusted. Well, Sauron goes and makes the 1 ring in secret. How is this version better than that version? I love every single thing that happens with the halflings, which is unsurprising since I love the hobbits, and I think Nori's journey with the stranger is a perfect parallel to Gandalf's relationship with the hobbits. Why? Even Aragorn, I'll just give her the Aragorn, and Eowyn fans can find something to love in Miriel and Elendil. Really? Can they, though? Can we really find anything to love in any of the Númenórean plot? This is just goes on like this. Okay. It is a great time to be a nerd. Every month we have a new show to unpack and love. But being online during this time has been miserable. Oh. All of these angry people have tried to ruin the fun for everyone else. What? Okay. How is it any different if I go and I make my video saying the Rings of Power sucks, and Rachel goes and writes her post saying that the Rings of Power is great? How is she ruining my fun by saying that it should be good? I'm not claiming that people who like this show are ruining anything for me. But somehow, if I don't like the show, I am ruining it for everybody else. They want to cry and complain that something they cherish and yet miss the basic principles it is trying to teach them is not what they want. We saw it with the Acolyte. We're seeing it with Marvel shows. The angry fans are out about Star Trek. Hell, even the boys got turned on. Jeez, could that have been because of the bizarre sexual assault turned into a joke, Rachel? So it goes on and on like this. But the point is we get shit like this all the time, from all over the media, where they don't even try to defend the show or respond to the arguments made about why the show is bad, but rather simply call out fans and toxic fans and try to usurp this idea that if you're like a fan of the original Star Wars trilogy, or you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings books, or you're a fan of, the older Star Trek shows, or you're a fan of all these things that came before, or like earlier editions of D&D, if you're one of those fans, the fans that have been around forever, the fans who made these things what they are, that popularized them, that brought them to the mainstream, that made millions and millions and millions of dollars for their creators and the big companies, if you're those fans, you are bad and wrong and toxic. If you're a gamer, but the Rachel Leichmans of the world who come around now, they're the ones who are the chosen, right? It's a wonderful time to be a nerd. Yeah, right. I don't think that's I don't know. I just don't buy it. I'm not trying to. I'm sure it's fine. They're nerds too. I'm not gonna no true Scotsman right back at them. But they're just so full of shit. Anyways, I don't know. I'm probably just rambling now. I need to make a video about Night Country because that's back on my radar because the Emmys are coming up. So I'm going to work on that next. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Catch you later. Peace.
Welcome to the swamp.